Well, hello and welcome to HubNut, the sister channel to HubNut. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. We are so close to 10,000 subs on this channel now, and it just complete what has been an astonishing year. Got the first video with 1 million views on HubNut. That's the DS driving on 3 wheels. We got the 100,000 subs on the main channel, and also it'll be 10 years since I started the channel when it was still Classic Hub. That was November 2013, so a momentous year all round. If we can get this channel to 10,000 subs, I will be very happy, thank you. I just wanted to talk a bit more about EA266 in more of a sort of a generally sort of way, because as everybody thinks, I did actually script it, but I can't work from a script. So really the script just ended up being a way of me cramming more information into my head. I had the script there, I would actually break off and look at it, but I can't do word for word stuff, and I think some details got missed. For instance, the origins of the engine. I think the engine was completely new. I don't think it related to any other engine. It was an overhead cam. I believe it had a rubber timing belt. I'm not 100% on that. There were limits to the detail of the information I was sent. And the engine was canted over, so the cylinder head was on the left-hand side of the vehicle. If you're looking at it from the rear, on the left-hand side, and there was a radiator wedged in on the right-hand side of the engine, facing forwards, and which raises all sorts of questions about how efficient the cooling was. Mind you, fairly similar to a Fiat 600, I suppose, which had a rear-mounted radiator in the same sort of layout. So that was in front, and then behind it would be a transaxle, so the engine's driving the rear wheels. It was a 4-speed, 5-speed, or a semi-automatic, or might have been a fully automatic, were proposed. So it was absolutely radical concept, and I thought completely unique, that no one else had done a mid-engined hatchback that actually still had a rear seat. Obviously, Renault 5, Renault Clio, and Metro 6R4 are hatchbacks with the engine lodged right in the back, but this was a practical 4 or 5 seater with the engine under the rear seat. And yeah, a staggering idea, and I find it remarkable that they proceeded with it so far, to have so many running prototypes that they were testing, you know, all over the place. We saw in the video footage up in Finland and down in South Africa. So it was, you know, they were really gearing that one up for production, but I think it would have been a pain. The location of the engine is just so problematic, because reaching it is problematic. I know people in the comments mentioned quite a few Japanese trucks where the engine, or Toyota Previa indeed, where the engine is inside the car, effectively the access is beneath the seats. But generally, there is a door next to where you're working on. In that 3-door car, the engine is right where you can't get at it. There is a picture on the internet. Maybe I'll try and nick it. I think it's a general circulation one of Volkswagens, but does show the engine access, and yeah, it just looks flawed. And I accept that perhaps manufacturers aren't thinking of DIY folk having to actually work on these cars, but I think in the 60s they probably did have an element of that. You would want your car to be relatively easy to work on. That was a concept that seemed to exist right through until the 1980s. The Vauxhall Cavaliers with the clutch you could replace without removing the gearbox. You know, servicing was key. And yeah, sadly I think things have changed somewhat since then. But yeah, it was a fascinating video to do. I've been wanting to do it for a very long time. But yeah, it was just a bit more about the mechanical complexities of it all. But extraordinary that Volkswagen and Porsche were also developing the 276. That's the rather Wartburg looking one that had a Volkswagen Beetle engine at the front driving the front wheels. And I also need to discuss, again, you know, I'm trying to keep a video short to 10 minutes, so I didn't want to go into too much detail about this. But Volkswagen K70 gets mentioned a lot, but as far as I know, I think the Volkswagen K70 was a dead end, ultimately. that was a car Volkswagen inherited by buying NSU. So NSU was already developing the K70 as a front-wheel drive, and NSU had opted, like the Row 80, to go for a longitudinal layout with the engine hanging out ahead of the gearbox, rather like Audi. And I mean, this is it. The Volkswagen Group, as it was becoming, already had Audi, and Audi had the engine in front of the gearbox, but that stemmed back from the two-stroke days of DKW. It's all very, very complicated. The more you try talking about it, the deeper it gets, but that's where the origins of that came from. DKW was one of the first manufacturers in the world to use front-wheel drive. In fact, in the 30s, I think they even had transverse engines and inspired cars such as the Trabant. So yeah, now I'm confusing myself even more. But what I'm trying to get to is the K70. It didn't use anything used with any other Volkswagens, and it ultimately proved a bit of a dead end because the Volkswagen Group already had a longitudinal engine for front-wheel drive in the form of the Audi, which would also be used in the Volkswagen Passat first generation, and they went transverse with the Golf. And it's interesting. I don't know whether the NSU engineers had a hand in developing the transverse application for the Golf. That was done within Volkswagen. That wasn't a Porsche operation. So that's now three completely separate front-wheel drive projects to replace the Beetle that Volkswagen were working on at the time. Apparently, Volkswagen was not being run by businessmen with any sense whatsoever. So yeah, it is possible because NSU did have transverse engines in their rear-wheel drive cars, I believe. So they would have had some experience of a transverse layout, albeit not incorporating steering as well. But Fiat 128, as we can clearly see in the testing footage of EA 266, they had a Fiat 128 there. And I think they were hoping to prove the limitations of front-wheel drive, but it must also have made some people think, you know what, this is very clever. This might actually be the way to do it. With the gearbox on the end of your transverse engine. And yeah, it did end up making a lot more sense. Oh, I'm having a terrible run along here today. They've got trucks just stopped in the road. Very, very helpful. But yeah, fascinating thing. And I would like to have a good dive deep into more history of more vehicles you've never heard of. It is difficult for me to judge sometimes what people know about and what people don't. But yeah, good fun. It kind of took me back to my old journalist days. It was that sort of thing. Generally what I do on HubNut doesn't relate too closely to what I was doing in my days working on Classic Car Weekly and the like. But I always love those deep dives into history. When I first started on Classic Car Weekly in 2007, oh, the truck's broken down. That's why it's there. I've got my lights on, yes. When I first started on Classic Car Weekly in 2007, one of the first series I ended up putting together was Motorsport Legends, I think it was. And deep dives into the history of rallying especially, because the road rallies that were going on right up until the 1960s were a source of deep fascination to me. The Liège-Sophia-Liège rally, where they would go racing on the public roads of Europe, and I think it was a 3-day rally with one scheduled stop of an hour, and that was it. So it was a true test of cars and the drivers themselves. Legends such as Eric Carlson and Pat Moss Carlson, who I was very fortunate to meet during the writing of those features. Unfortunately, I'd already written the Pat Moss one when I met Pat Moss, who was lovely, such a lovely lady, Sir Sterling's sister, but a fantastic rally driver back in the day. She won the Liège-Sophia-Liège rally one year, I think, or it might have been the Brescia rally. I forget the details. It's a long time since I wrote that. And she won it in a Healy 3000, I believe, which an extraordinary car to drive. Oh, well, a quick diversion. We've got one of the electric buses coming through. That was a fully electric bus that now runs between Aberystwyth and Carmarthen. I'm going to be interested to see how those do in service. Generally, I think electric buses is better suited to cities where emissions are more of an issue, but still interesting to see. But yeah, jumping back to Pat Moss, I mean, just a remarkable woman, because she's tiny. She's an absolutely tiny lady, and she was handling these brutish Healy 3000s. I've driven a standard road-going Healy 3000, and believe me, they're a very physical car to drive. You sometimes feel like you need two hands on the gear lever. A wonderful car to drive. One of the first cars I ever got paid to drive as a motoring journalist was a Healy 3000, and it was absolutely incredible. But it did make me think of Pat Moss instantly, because I was just like, this is hard work. And it is said that her co-driver had to keep her feet on the centre console because the exhaust running under the passenger floor made the floor so hot you couldn't put your feet on it. Just different times and different people, I think. But yeah, I loved diving into so much information and distilling that into a magazine feature. I could never write a book, I don't think, because a book is the source material. And I don't think I'd be capable of doing that. But taking a book and turning it into a magazine feature, that is something I could do very easily. And I was very fortunate to meet Pat Moss and Eric Carlson before they sadly passed away. Yes, Eric Carlson, another larger-than-life character. He's not tiny, he is quite big, and yet he rallied those tiny little Saab two-strokes. Surprised he had any hearing left at all, because they would, go for an exhaust that had no silencing in it whatsoever, really loud. And those were days when you drove to the rally. So wherever the rally was, you drove the car there first. So if it was a Portuguese rally, you first had to drive from the Saab factory in Sweden all the way to Portugal, compete in a rally, which would generally be 3 days of lots of driving and no rest. And then, and then you got to drive all the way home again. That's just absolutely remarkable. I kind of see it's not very safe. And Eric Carlson told me that he and his co-driver perfected the art of doing a driver change on the move. So, yeah, not safe times at all. And I can see exactly why such rallies would be banned. But yeah, so much fun to speak to these people and get those stories. But yeah, there we go. I've rambled on for 12 minutes already. I'm not really entirely sure what the point was, but yeah, I will be doing more of those deep dives, but they do take time to put together, so please do bear with me. But yeah, massively enjoyed it. So right, I'm going to get home, and got merch to pack, got videos to edit, and I will see you in a future video. Farewell. No Pachu on this channel, so if you don't like Pachus, HubNotes is where you need to be.